Hello and welcome to the webinar, Back to the Future, Adapting PR Skills to Power Influencer Marketing. My name is Philip Smith. I'm the Head of News and Content at Gorkana, and I'm delighted to be your host today as we look again at the ever-popular subject of influencers and influencer marketing. This time, however, we're going to look at how comms fits into influencer marketing and how communicators can make the most of their skills in this still developing discipline. Over the next 45 minutes or so, we will look at the power of true influencer marketing and how it can drive an earned media strategy, and how communicators with hard-earned skills in media relations and elsewhere can adapt their talents to work with a range of influencers. Topics we'll also look at in the webinar include what influencer marketing is and how it is developed, how to plan and measure an influencer marketing strategy, the most important things to consider when adapting your comm skills for influencer marketing. Examples always bring such ideas to life, so we're also going to hear how big brands such as ITV, Tesco Mobile and Travel Supermarket have made influencer marketing work. This will all add up to show the power of influencer marketing and prove that in a media sense, the future is earned for brands and how an earned media strategy should be at the heart of all campaigns. So, to take us all through this, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Adrian Ma and Emily Barnes from Fanclub PR, which is an earned media specialist and covers everything from media relations to events. Adrian, Emily, welcome to the webinar.
Hello, thank you.
Hello.
Adrian Ma is the founder and managing director of Fanclub PR. He tells us that he is a geek at heart. He spent the last 2 decades working with clients to leverage the potential of digital communications for PR strategies. And today he says that he's passionate about improving PR practices so that it can be as valuable as possible. In the past, he's worked at Komodo. He's worked with brands like Heinz, Eurostar, Yahoo, and Disney. Emily Barnes is an account manager at Fanclub PR as well. She leads on influencer projects for clients including Tesco Mobile and ITV. From developing influencer marketing strategies to managing high-profile YouTuber creators, Emily has a 3-year track record of successfully choosing the right influencers for carefully considered partnerships that create measurable advocacy for clients and their brands. I suspect that's easily done than said. I found that a bit of a tongue twister. I also found out today she has a degree in anthropology and that actually Adrian also studied at Goldsmiths. You both studied at Goldsmiths.
Yeah.
We did, yeah.
Different subjects though, I believe. Adrian and Emily are going to start the webinar with a 20-25 minute presentation in a minute, and then we're going to move on 15-20 minutes of Q&A or so. So do take the chance throughout the presentation to send in your questions for Adrian and Emily, and we'll get them covered off afterwards. Just use the panel on the right-hand side of your screen and send us in your comments and questions. And we look forward to hearing what you want to know about influencer marketing and make sure that we give you individual answers. And I will make sure that we keep enough time at the end of the webinar to get those answered. You know what? I think that's enough from me at this stage. I'm going to hand over to Adrian and Emily, and I'm going to return in 20-25 minutes to moderate the question and answer session. Adrian, please start the presentation.
Thanks very much, Philip. And hello, webinar friends. Do use the questions or chat so I can see that you're there and out there and engaged. This is a handsome chap called Jim Chapman. We'll come back to him later on, don't worry. This is us. As you can see, we like folding our arms. So that's me on the left and Emily on the right. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, Philip. As Philip mentioned, I am the founder and managing director of Fanclub PR. We are an agency based in Dalston in East London. My background is working across agencies like Consolidated, which is now part of 4 Communications, Cow and Komodo, which is now part of Chameleon. I guess one of the reasons I set up Fanclub was to try and make PR more valuable, and that's why we place a major focus on how PR is evolving so that we can make our clients' budgets stretch further and prove the effectiveness of our work beyond just straightforward media relations. And because of that, we are early adopters in influencer marketing for our clients. So that's a little bit about me, Emily.
Hi everyone, I'm Emily. I'm an account manager here at Fanclub, and I work mostly with consumer clients across kind of telecoms, food and drink, travel, amongst others. And I'm the kind of go-to, I suppose, at our agency for influencer marketing, mostly because it started off with me just being a big fan of watching YouTube. I just love watching YouTubers, and it kind of progressed from there. And since then, I've learned a lot about different platforms and how influencers can work for a variety of clients, really, over the three or so years. So.
Yeah, so I thought before we delve into how PR skills need to adapt today to change for influencer marketing, I thought it might be worth having a think about or looking back at how PR skills have changed over my career. So I started off in PR back in the late 90s, and I know I look great for my age. Thank you very much, people. I showed my team a picture of this earlier and asked them, actually people had no idea what it was. This is a fax machine, and one of these used to sit at the end of the bank of a team's desk, so we had about 6 people sharing a fax machine. And if you are an account exec or grad, you would basically spend about 80% of your time stood there faxing press releases, each of which had separate covering notes to journalists. And so you had to be really, really good at dialing. That was the main skill you needed to have then. Nowadays, if you mention the word tranny, a lot of people might think about people who are on RuPaul's Drag Race. But actually, trannies, back when I started off in PR, were these things. These aren't slides. We couldn't email photographs or pictures to newspaper editors or magazine editors. We had to courier around these trannies around. That's the only way that they could publish pictures. They had to scan those individually and put them into Quark. And so you had to be really good at managing a courier budget. That was one of the skills that we had in the past. And this is a terrible, rubbish computer. And there used to be one of these which was connected to the internet and systems in each of the offices. And in fact, when Gorkana first launched into the UK, I remember sitting there in Cal, and we had a demo, and there was a special Gorkana computer, which is how you got onto the media database to find the media's contact details, and you could export to Excel and print that off and go back to your desk and start your pitching. We literally had account execs fighting to get time onto this computer, and of course they've evolved now with Cision, and it's all desktop and mobile friendly. But yes, you have to be good at fighting. That was another skill. And to a certain extent, you had to be a good smoker. When I first started off in PR, you were allowed to, so in our PR agency, you were allowed to smoke before 9 AM and after 5 PM in the office. Or if you were a director, you could smoke in the director's office all the time. And so basically, everyone had very, very unhealthy lungs. So another skill is you had to be healthy to be in PR, or at least trying to have healthy young lungs. But that's a little bit about how PR has evolved over the last 18, 19 years. I think what's been interesting is how consumer behavior has evolved and what influences purchasing decisions. And about 10 years ago, about the time when Facebook was starting to really take off and become famous, and people were inviting people to become friends on there, that's when the world of blogging became really influential. And these, I guess, were early iterations of social media influences. And I witnessed this firsthand through this lady, Susie Bubble, or Susie Lau, who some people may recognize on the webinar. My wife is a fashion designer, and she runs her own fashion label. And I helped her launch the label, and we had a great launch. We got some coverage in Grazia and in Vogue, but it wasn't until we got a piece of coverage on Susie Bubble's blog that we really saw things take off. I mean, the reaction from being featured on her blog was a multiple of that of Vogue. It was more powerful than Vogue. Marketers at this time started to realize that social media is having a huge impact on purchasing decisions. And there are some reports at this time that came out that said that 83% of consumers felt that social media interaction increases the likelihood of purchase. 81% of consumers were impacted by a friend's social media post before making a purchase about a particular item. And the average number of people who would see someone's good experience of using a product or service on social media, at the time, that was an average of 42 people would see someone saying this is a great service. That was massive, absolutely massive, and blew the previous metrics out of the water. And brand marketers and any type of marketer thought this is a bandwagon that we needed to get on. So what happened was they made huge bets on content strategies, only to find out that they underperformed. So in 2011, Coca-Cola announced with great fanfare that they were going to launch Coca-Cola Journeys, and they went all in with a massive emphasis on content excellence. And there was a guy at Coke called Jonathan Mildenhall who said at the time that Coke would produce the world's most compelling content that would capture a disproportionate share of popular culture, and he would double sales by 2020. That is massive. And Coca-Cola Journeys turned out to be a static digital magazine, and it ran stories on lots of different topics in pop culture: sports, food, sustainability. And it's now been live for about 4 years. It hasn't cracked the top 20,000 sites worldwide. Its YouTube channel has 676,000 subscribers. But to their credit, they have to do some great content. But there's a really good piece of content where there's a truck driving around the favelas of Rio giving out Coca-Cola. But if you ask people who work outside of marketing if they've seen it, it's very unlikely they would have seen it. They would say no. The reach isn't great with the stuff that they have done, even if it has been great. Now, I don't know how much Coca-Cola has spent on Coca-Cola Journeys or their content strategies. I do know that Red Bull has around a $2 billion marketing budget, and a lot of that is spent on content. Now, Red Bull are one of the few firms that I do feel are getting it right with content strategy. They've got something that works. They have spent years crafting this beautiful brand positioning and creating a lot of engagement with these extreme sports communities to really foster that. But that has been helped with a $2 billion marketing budget, $2 billion a year. But when you consider that in terms of return on investment, I don't know, there's a question mark over whether it is giving a return on investment. These guys run a YouTube channel called Dude Perfect. They are 5 guys, 5 jocks from Texas, and they make videos of trick shots or goofy athletic feats. They've got 8 million subscribers to their YouTube channel. That's 10 times the amount that Coca-Cola has, over 10 times the amount that Coca-Cola has, double that of Red Bull, and they've achieved that with under a marketing budget of $100,000. So it turns out that consumers don't actually have a great deal of interest in the content that brands churn out. And actually, a lot of people would view the branded content on their feeds as brand spam or clutter. So this brings us on to the influencer and the role of the influencer. Here we are, that handsome chap again. So the role of the influencer is to create 2 things for a brand, and this is a consumer brand or business-to-business brand: authenticity and reach. Now, let's have to think about authenticity first. If you've ever been on a YouTuber channel and looked at the comment sections of their videos, it's incredible. Like, these people who watch their videos really do feel like they know these YouTubers intimately. I remember working with Jim Chapman. So that's this guy here. Jim Chapman was one of the first superstar influencers that we worked with on a campaign. And he produced a piece of content for us for his Saturnus channel. And one of the comments on there was, "Oh, Jim, I love you so much. I wish you were my dad." My dad. Can you imagine being that poor parent and being, thinking that your child measured you against this handsome chap here? It's terrible. But you can see how their audiences place a huge amount of credibility into their opinions. So they're so powerful when it comes to authenticity, and so credible when it comes to advocacy. And in terms of reach, the numbers speak for themselves. I mean, you would have seen the subscriber numbers to and follower numbers for these influencers. It is bonkers. But the important thing to remember here is that targeting is really important. So if you're working with influencers, you need to make sure that you're connecting to the right audiences And the right audiences are the same audiences that your other marketing channels are going for, say, advertising, sponsorship, whatever you're doing to reach customers, the influencers should be reaching the same customers. The idea here is that you're using influencers as part of the mix to create as many different touch points with the same customer as many times as possible to prompt consideration. So when you're thinking about influencers, think about how they're most effectively deployed as part of a marketing mix. And this brings us on to why PR is best placed to deliver influencer marketing. You need, to do influencer marketing right, you need to have an editorial eye. It needs to feel native to the channel in which it sits. And that's why PR is arguably has a head start over advertising. Because of advertising, it's push content. You're buying space on someone else's channel. You can put whatever you want in there, and it's one direction to another. With social media, it's a conversation. So you're managing a relationship. You're managing a relationship between a brand, the influencers, and its audience. And that's why PR has a head start in that sense as well, because it's all about reputation management as well. Finally, I think the data, use of data and use of data to identify the right audiences and influencers is really, really important. Arguably, media agencies are really, really good at this, and I'd say that there's a lot to learn from media agencies. I think there's a lot to learn from lots of different marketing disciplines, digital marketing, even different industries like law. So, but we can take inspiration from all of these and evolve our skill set further. And so the duty really falls to us in terms of where influence marketing is aimed, because it's about the editorial stance. And what we'd like to do now is share with you the 5 top skills that we need to adapt as an industry for influencer marketing. First up is the first skill is all about measurement. So traditional PR metrics just do not cut it when it comes to influencer marketing. We definitely need to take inspiration from digital marketing here if we're going to align the work we do to the client's goals. So Emily here is going to take us through what we need to do.
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of metrics for digital performance, data, as Adrian said, is key to measuring performance, just like any other strategy. And thinking about all these metrics will really help put together your influencer brief, which I'll go over shortly. But metrics really do depend on the objectives of the campaign. You know, is it to increase sales? Is it to push brand awareness? Is it to talk to a specific audience? I'm going to run through some measurement metrics which are kind of imperative to show value for all campaigns, and also look at a couple which work for more specific objectives as well. So first and foremost, I think it's about getting the key messages out to the target audience. And to measure that, you're going to want to look at some basics. One being view count. Clients are always really, really surprised about how quickly the views go up and kind of how quickly engagement starts coming in. Something you could look at, which traditionally people have looked at with influencer marketing, is cost per view. It's really basic, but it's a useful way to measure a basic return on investment. And whilst looking at that, things like potential reach, so in other words, social media follower numbers is really important. And what I mean by that is, you know, for a view count, you can see how many people have viewed that video. For potential reach, you're looking at the amount of followers that they have who may potentially have seen that content. And so if an influencer is cross-promoting content on their own channels, their followers are kind of a good indicator of the amount of people who have engaged with it, really. But looking at views and potential reach, whilst it's valuable and it's really useful, it shouldn't really be used in isolation, because what's really imperative to break down is engagement. You know, it's all well and good if you found the influencer who's got a massive subscriber base, or, you know, a really, really great subscriber base and the right audience, the right people. How can you show that that audience has actually engaged with that content and the messaging, and that, you know, it's not been lost in the abyss of their news feeds, and it's not just scrolled past it, which of course Adrian mentioned, you know, does happen with branded content. I mean, there are lots of metrics to look at here. The basics are, you know, likes and comments. If someone's bothered to like or comment on a piece of content, it generally shows that they give a toss about it and that they're actually, you know, interested in it. View rates are really important, and what that is essentially looking at when someone starts watching the video, you know, how many of them have got past a certain point in the video and they haven't just scrolled through and it's, you know, placed a few seconds in their feed. And that can be got from the influencers themselves, from their own channel, or if you're working with an influencer on some of your own channels, you have access to that data as well. Sentiment is super important. If you're looking at sentiment of comments and engagement, you know, it's all good saying, well, I've got tons of comments, it's really good, we've got loads of people engaged. If they're all saying that the brand really sucks and that the content is rubbish, then you've not done very well. So you want to be looking at positive sentiment through likes, and looking just really at the conversations that people are having as well. Depending on other kind of objectives for campaigns, some other kind of useful metrics, you can use tracking links, and you can use Google Analytics for this, and obviously that's taken from affiliate marketing. So you look at referral traffic to a specific web page to show how many people have actually invested in the wider journey. And that's a really, really hard metric to just say, look, this amount of people have seen this, have clicked on that link and gone to the page. And equally, you know, product codes and things like that. So to say, you know, how many people have watched a piece of content and then use a specific code to go and buy something after they've watched it. I mean, there are quite a few, but I'd say that, you know, the key metrics you want to look at are views and engagement, through whatever metrics that might be, and they're the ones that you should be always using as standard for any campaign.
Cool. The second skill we're going to be talking about is understanding audience data. So traditionally, PR consultants have been the poor cousins to media planners when it comes to audience data, but as an industry, we need to get much better and understand the tools that help us identify and select the right influencers for a campaign.
Exactly, and those likes, comments, clicks, and everything else in between are useless if they're not from the right people. You need to identify your audience to find the people that they care about and who you should be using as your brand mouthpiece, really. I can't even imagine the amount of people that approach the likes of Zoella and they say, you know, oh, I've really got this campaign, I really want to work with Zoella, she's got tons of subscribers, she's got gazillions and gazillions. But, you know, it's all well and good, but if they're not the right people, then it's not going to work. So I'd say a really important thing to think about is don't focus on numbers. The audience needs to be the right people and not just the right amount. And you need to choose someone that's genuinely influential. And this isn't easy. I know it can be really overwhelming, jumping into this big sea of thousands and thousands of influencers. So you can do a couple of things to find that real jackpot match, really. You can manually search yourself. You can do some good old desk research, look at who is talking about what. And a tool that we really like to use is Peg. And Peg is basically a LinkedIn for social influencers. So it's predominantly for YouTube influencers, but you can search by topic, location, and all-important audience demographics. You can break that down by age, location, gender, and you can even check out what other sponsors' content they've done in the past, and that's really, really important to see how those performed as well. What you really want to be doing is kind of getting a neatly packaged profile of each influencer, which you can then use to present to your client. And most influencers will have their details on their pages as well, so you can contact them directly for that kind of information. Another really, really useful way is just to team up with people who have a knowledge of the space as well and have a pool of influencer contacts themselves. You know, back in the day, not so much anymore, but you know, you can use things like multi-channel networks. Brave Bison and Channel Flip are a couple based in the UK. They work with video platforms to help that channel owner with their sponsored content. They kind of take the brief and do a lot of the legwork for you. You can also just go directly to social influencer agencies. They're represented just like celebs are. So you'll go through their agents in the very beginning, and they can be good consultants to find a better fit for you, really, once you've relayed the brief to them. I'm sure some of you guys here on the webinar have heard of Glean. They're one of the biggest agencies. But there's lots of others too. There's Red Hair, and lots of them you can, as I say, go directly to and just speak with someone who will be able to help you break down that brief and find the best fit. And when you've shortlisted them, I think it's really important to then have a few key considerations and use as many tools as you can to support your strategy and get lots of meaty data together. A couple of tips from me are look at average views relative to subscribers. So average views are a really great way to show how regularly engaged the audience is. If you've got someone with loads of subscribers, but their average views is also comparable to someone with half the subscribers, that's something really, really important to think about. And also use examples, say, of other sponsored content they've produced and look at how this has performed and the sentiment with which it's been received. And you can get a lot of info like that actually straight from the influencers themselves. Sometimes they even have a bit of a show reel for you. And all this is going to kind of produce a nice, neat package for you to be able to send that to your client and really back up what your strategy is with lots of nice data.
Cool. The third area is developing a critical eye. So I think traditionally PR agencies are really good at briefing and providing feedback on written copy, but influencer content is often very, very visual and video based even. So as an industry, we need to start thinking and briefing like an advertising agency, but actually we give feedback like a digital magazine editor. And all of this starts with the creative brief.
Exactly. This is really, really important. You know, it's obviously, it's going to make sure that your key message is conveyed properly, but also it's to get them into you and be like, look, this is my brand, this is what's going on. You really want them to be excited about it because that's ultimately going to come across in the content as well. In terms of sort of housekeeping stuff, the briefing template might be provided by them or the influencers themselves or their agency, but I'd always recommend that you have your own template on your system, not least to cross-reference with theirs to ensure that kind of everything's been covered. And usually this can be sometimes combined with a bit of a legal document to create a kind of comprehensive brief in terms. But for the purpose of clarity, first I'll run over the kind of creative part of that brief. So first of all, you want to talk about the campaign. So you can talk about the client, the brand, the product, the cause, and a bit of context to the campaign. What came before it? You know, what's the main objective? Any references or links to other stages of the campaign are really, really useful. And think about the tone of voice as well. I think, you know, as I said, you've got to get them really excited and try and just write as if you're the brand. That'll kind of give them a good idea of what's expected. Key messaging is obviously the golden part here. It's really, really important, and it doesn't have to be verbatim, but basically it's the essence of what you want them to convey. So don't think just about a strap line. You know, it's not an advert. Think about what the call to action is and how they might say this without it feeling really inorganic. And generally write the key messages in order of importance. So try and keep it to, I'd say, under 3, because that just makes the content flow much better and it's a little bit less convoluted and it just kind of keeps it nice and simple and succinct. And then also just a bit of an overview of deliverables. So where the content's hosted, how many pieces of content you want, any social media deliverables, you know, if you want them to amplify it through their own social channels, and include links and handles and hashtags, and overviews of timings as well. And content references are really, really useful because they're going to be leading on the content. You can, you know, suggest some video ideas at this stage, but the most important thing in all of this is just remember that it needs to be driven creatively by them. They know what works for their channel, and it's up to them to use the brief to create something that works. So don't give them too much creative direction. I think they need to retain their authenticity because that's what's going to get engagement. People see right through really, really forced, awkward key messaging and videos, and it just doesn't work. And it's, you know, there's plenty of examples out there of those that have gone wrong. I think you just have to really be led by the influencer and what they know works for their audience as well. And sometimes this can involve a lot of pushback for your client. Sometimes the client will be like, well, you know, I don't agree with that. I think, you know, we should say it like this, and I think that, you know, the video should be like this. And it always goes badly. I think they have to leave, and you know, unless there's any factual inaccuracies, I think just leave it up to the content creators themselves to lead on the creative.
Yeah, definitely. The fourth skill is brushing up on our media law, and all of this comes from creating the terms. And the terms that you put in front of an influencer are there to protect you, your client, and the influencer should things not go the way you expect them to. And on social media, because it's a conversation, quite often things do have a life of their own. One of the most controversial agreements recently was when Fanclub, a travel influencer, visited North Korea. I would have loved to have seen the ins and outs of the terms there. The content was absolutely crazy as well, but we don't know what the terms are. I'd love to know how much he was paid, but Emily's going to take us through tips for creating the terms that protect us all.
Exactly. So for the influencer, you know, influencers themselves, they know about ASA guidelines which dictate, you know, what should be identified as a sponsored or advertisement, advertorial piece of content. They'll know this and they'll tag it appropriately. But we also need to look at, you know, we need to look out for our client and ourselves as well. And so there's lots of things to consider when writing terms by which, you know, the influencer has to create their content. So obviously deliverables, when you list the content deliverables, this should include dates. and perhaps a rough timeline. It's really, really important to include how many rounds of feedback you require. Again, as I said earlier, it should be led creatively by them. So you won't be necessarily be able to do feedback on the creative, but to factual inaccuracies or breach of agreement, hopefully that shouldn't happen. You do need a round of feedback, or you need to have a look at the content before it goes live. We find that 2 is generally a good number of rounds of feedback, and it's also really important that you, as an agency or PR, you also check the content first, just to kind of vet it, ensure there's no major red flags. That's really important and something we find is really imperative. Do's and don'ts. This is really, really useful. So things like swearing. If you're a family brand, you're not going to want someone swearing throughout the video. Correct referencing of the branding campaign, and this actually happens more often than you think, where someone might have edited it really quickly or not done it properly, and then they've actually referenced the branding correctly or the campaign incorrectly, or they've got a detail wrong. So if there's any specific ways that people commonly mispronounce a brand or whatever, just make sure you include all of that. You really want it to be as detailed as you can, really, to make sure that they are not making any of those errors before it comes over to you for the initial feedback. And any other things you don't want the content to include, so no references to competitors, no negativity around certain topics, all that kind of stuff. Really important thing is campaign period and ownership. So the campaign period is, how long does the client own rights to the content? And generally, this is anything from, it tends to be about 1 to 3 months, but the longer that is, the more fee generally the influencer will ask for. And this is also the period after which the influencer is technically able to delete the content if they want. So that's an important consideration if you kind of want to reuse that content in a year for whatever reason. Media spend. Influencers always want to know, are you putting paid promotion behind the content? And if so, how long will it be promoted for? So they basically want to know, they're looking out for themselves, they want to know how long you're going to be using their face on your stuff, really. And the last thing I'll briefly go over is cost. The big one. So the total fee upon, the execution of the content, really. When negotiating fees, there is no set or recognised process. Generally, influencers don't have rate cards. They don't have a set amount of cost. It's more of a case of kind of outlining the deliverables and then coming back to you with a price, really. And negotiation is generally part of this process. And, there will be a bit of to and fro, and that's normal. But generally, I think they tend to lead with costs. As opposed to you saying, well, this is my budget, what can I get for it? It really depends on the deliverables, the type of content, how long, they're going to have to produce this content. There's lots of factors to consider. The negotiation is really, really important, and it's very natural and something that happens a lot.
Cool. And that brings us to the final skill, which is actually something which comes from good old traditional PR, but is just sped up. Haters are going to hate. And when you put a piece of influencer content out there, it's not unusual to get a bad reaction from audiences, and you will see some people accusing the influencer of selling out. But equally, you'll find opportunities to amplify the content through the conversation that's happening around a piece of content as well. So it's really important to set up real-time monitoring when a content goes live, piece of content goes live. And a good thing to do is, before the piece of content goes live, is review previous comments from sponsored content and have a plan of action for negative comments and scenarios. And I think in the future, companies like Cision, I hope, will be developing some AI tools to help with this, so we can make better decisions faster. Just a little tip there for you, Philip.
Thank you.
So in summary, the kind of 5 key skills that we feel that PR as an industry needs to work on. 1 is setting digital KPIs. Make sure you're familiar with them all, be able to speak the language. Use audience insights like a media planner. Brief like an ad agency. Feedback like a digital magazine editor. Create terms like a media lawyer. And react like you've always done, but just faster. So we've got a case study. I don't know if you want to. Yeah. Okay. We've got a case study I wanted to show you. Well, an example of influence marketing, which I hope that will inspire you. I'll try to be quick. But this is a great piece of work from 2015, and this chap here is this is a still from a TV campaign for Tesco Mobile, where he was trying to wake up the nation to better, telling people to wake up to better telephone service and lower bills. Our job was to augment this into a campaign which would engage with young audiences, and we know that young audiences are turning from TV and they're super engaged with social media. Our job was to take this idea of wake up call and reach these young audiences. So we decided to team up with this guy on the left. He's called Joe Sugg, aka Factor Joe. We also did work with his friend here on the right here, Casper Lee. And we created a multi-stage campaign using a combination of different social media platforms and combined it with traditional PR tactics. So we had a campaign with longevity. And this is what he did. He created a very, very funny video on his channel where he and Casper Lee had gone on holiday to the Philippines. I know it's a very hard life being a social media influencer. And he wake him up every day for a week, very, very early in very unpleasant ways. So here he is about to soak Casper Lee in his hotel bed, and he absolutely wakes up frothing at the mouth, fuming that he does it. And he keeps doing this every single day. It's so funny. There's one where he hides loads of alarm clocks in his room and he can't find them, and he puts shaving foam on his head. It was amazing. And it received over 2.3 million views, and you can see how it relates to a wake-up theme. He also helped us create the world's largest emojis in crop circle form. And here he is. He is starring in a piece of video content which sat on Tesco Mobile's channel, which received just under 1 million views. He amplified this content through his own social media channels. So he posted it on Instagram, that got over 300,000 likes. He put it on his Facebook page, which got 30,000 likes, and he Snapchatted about it as well. So that drove a lot of views to that piece of content. And in fact, here it is, the world's largest emoji in crop circle form. The client liked it so much, they asked us to turn it into a YouTube pre-roll advert, a 30-second advert, and it was amazing. It performed so well that Marketing Week contacted us saying, "Are you the agency that created this advert on YouTube?" And we're like, "Yeah." Well, it's one of the top 10 performing adverts of the month. And we were like, "Wow, what, really?" And they measure organic performance and organic shares of these adverts. And it was an incredible moment for our agency to see these massive ad agencies with massive production budgets, and they're all up there: Ogilvy, BBH, Fanclub PR, and it's like, brilliant. But it goes to show that if you do it right and use influencers in the right way, you can create so much value out of them. And that's on top of all the usual PR success we got from TV, radio, online as well. So yeah, that hopefully that inspires you.
Great, thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Emily. Now we've got some time here for questions, so I can see that some questions are coming in, but please take the chance now to send in your questions. And before we start on those, Emily, I'm going to come to you first. I think one of the things there is that we talked about, and Adrian talked about, for instance, first getting involved with influencer marketing by seeing fashion and how big an impact a fashion blogger had on sales and on the response that they could get to something they did. Do you think that every market, or should I put it another way, can every brand do influencer marketing?
Yeah, I mean, in the broader sense of the word, you know, it is PR, and an influencer can be an influencer on anything. I mean, they could be an influencer on analysis, they could be a celebrity. If you're talking about social media influencers, I think it depends on the audience you're trying to target, but I think that there's tons of influencers in really niche, who cover really, really niche topics and have really, really niche networks of kind of engaged followers. I mean, we haven't just worked with lifestyle influencers, we've worked with craft influencers, we've worked...
Gaming is a big one, right?
Gaming, yeah. We've worked with Minecraft, a Minecraft YouTuber, and I think that whilst there are definitely some industries who have become quite famous for influencer and influencer content, I think that pool of influencers is growing much bigger, and with that, you know, you're getting influencers in really niche, covering really niche topics, and I think that therefore, you know, yes, I do think that a lot of brands can work with influencers in varying ways, really, and it really depends on the objectives of the campaign.
And I think just to add to that, I can see one of the questions here is about whether influencer marketing can be used for B2B PR. The answer is absolutely. If you think about influencers again in its broadest sense, we do a lot of work with technology companies in the B2B space, and influencers there tend to be analysts. So you have the Forresters and the Gartners of this world, or you have like super niche influencers like Peggy Ann Saltz, who's a mobile analyst. It's about how you collaborate with those guys and collaborate and create content with those guys, or give them access to exclusive experiences or content which you don't necessarily have to pay for. It's just thinking about influence in those sense. And if you think about those analysts, it's not just editorial fields that you want the content to go to. They have massive followers on Medium or on LinkedIn, and so it's about leveraging their audiences on these social channels as much as it is about using these YouTubers and Zoellas of the world.
Great, thank you. Now, I can see a lot of questions. I think we're going to get through quite a few here, though, because some of them are similar. So the first one, and I don't want to tease the audience because I could do this, which is so many people have asked for the name of the app or the sort of LinkedIn for influencers that Emily mentioned. So let me just cover how many of these questions there are. There's one, what was the app you mentioned, Search for Influencers? Can you confirm the name of the LinkedIn for professional influencers, please? I missed it. And there was another one which asked for that as well. So Emily, do you want to reveal all and repeat the name for the LinkedIn for social influencers, please?
Absolutely. It's called PEG, and I think the site is peg.co, and it's a really, really useful tool. It's got a really great search function where you can search by a topic, and then you can kind of choose, there's tons of filters, so you can really, really find, the person that's exactly right for you. You can break it down by the topics they talk about, previous brands they've worked with, and obviously, really importantly, their audience demographics, as said. So there's an algorithm there which breaks the audience down by age and gender, location, and that's really, really important because, as we mentioned, audience demographics are so important because, it's not an audience. The influencers themselves can have a very different audience to who tick a lot of the boxes than they themselves do. So it's really important to say, well, you might think that someone's speaking to a certain type of people, but actually when you look at their audience demographics, it can be quite different and therefore might not be the best fit for your campaign.
And I've also been surprised by audience geographical breakdown.
Yeah.
There's actually a lot of UK influencers who have huge overseas audiences, which may or may not be relevant to your clients. And that's why it's really useful as well.
Exactly. I'm sorry, I should just mention in case you couldn't really hear it, PEG, that's P-E-G, as in clothesline peg.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Well, thanks for clearing that up. And I think that's made a lot of people happy because, as I said, there were quite a few questions on that. Now, we've got some questions about the thing we always get asked about, which is money and budget. So I'll come on to that in a minute, I think. Before we do that, because you both talked about the importance of demographics and talked about targeting an audience in mind. Adrian, if I start with you, I'm going to ask you about some of the different audiences that people are interested in. So the first one is about a more mature audience. So the question is, how about more mature audiences, 35 plus? How much engaged? So I think that means how engaged are those audiences with influencers, and are there influencers for aiming at a more mature audience?
This is a great question, really great question, and something that we work on a lot actually, particularly when it comes to targeting parents, which is the objective of one of our clients. So in the past, I think when people think about social media influencers, they do tend to think about YouTubers, but actually there are a load of comedy and technology influencers and education influencers even that have a much older audiences, and also there are people like fitness influencers and cooking influencers who have older audiences as well. But the important thing to remember is that, again, when we're talking about influencers, we are talking about them in the broadest sense. So, for example, last year, we needed to find an audience, an influencer that targeted parents who are about 40-ish, and this is last Christmas. So rather than going down a traditional social media influence, I can't believe I'm saying traditional social media influencers now, we went down a traditional celebrity route and hired Alicia Dixon, who is a celebrity with a great social media following. And we hired her for her social media following more than for her media interest. In fact, I don't think we did a little bit of media work with Alicia, didn't we? But
yeah.
it was mostly social media work we did with her. So if you are targeting more mature audiences, think about these celebrities and more traditional channels, if you like, that have big social media audiences.
But, sorry, just to add to what Adrian said there, I think with that it's also important to consider that the platforms that they're engaged with might change. So Facebook, for example, you tend to have a lot more of an engaged and older audience than you would say on YouTube.
Yeah.
And the parenting community and parenting influencers, for example, on Facebook are, their audiences are super engaged because they have huge conversations in the comments about topics that they're discussing. So they are really engaged. It's just that I think you have to think a little bit about the very specific platforms that they're engaged on.
How does that work for change of sector? So let's not think about necessarily change of age demographic, but change of sector. So the question is, hi, how could influencer marketing work in a home care stroke healthcare setting? Adrian, do you have any examples where that's happened or what projects you worked on, or can you think of how that might work?
Well, actually, with healthcare, it depends on the product. If it's an over-the-counter product, it's a lot easier. I think if it's a prescription product in healthcare, that'd be a lot more difficult. But for example, we pitched for an optical brand earlier this year or last year, I can't remember. And we were creating an influencer marketing campaign for those guys, and it was all around healthcare and fitness and beauty as well. And so within healthcare, there are kind of these peripheral niche interests that orbit that healthcare world, where you can look at influencers to engage certain audiences. But you need to think about what the actual idea is as well. So central to all of this is not just about giving the influencer the budget and then going away to create a piece of content. It's about what's the creative platform? Is there something that we can? Is there an amazing idea that we can do? One example, which isn't in healthcare or home care, but is in the charity sector, is something we worked on called the Mince Pie Project, where it was a charity project to raise money for two charities at Christmas, where our client engaged 100 celebrity chefs and social media influencers to create a batch of mince pies, and these were all auctioned on a website. So Philip, you could go to this and buy a batch of 12 mince pies made by Michelle Wu Jr. to give to someone if you had
or eat myself.
Or eat yourself, yeah, exactly. And they didn't have any budget. They didn't pay any of these influencers or celebrities to get involved. It's just a great idea. So if the idea is good enough, it doesn't necessarily need to be directly related to your client's sector. But if the idea is good enough, you can certainly use influencers to create engagement.
You can tell a true professional like Adrian, because he's answered the next question before I even asked it, which was, do you have any advice for charities who may wish to engage influencers but do not have budget to pay fees? So in that case, you're saying a great idea. Does it help that it's a charity? Does it help that if it's a particular cause that, say, the influencer is identified with?
It's a funny one, actually, because we have worked on charity projects with influencers, and they have just turned around straight away and said, what's the fee?
Yeah.
Have you got budget for this? Because they're just not used to it. They're not used. A lot of these people and their agents and managers are actually really nascent to this world of influencer management, and they will just turn around and ask for fees for everything, won't they?
Yeah.
But it could be something that they have a natural interest in. You can if you're smart about how you search for influencers, you can look at some of the things that they've overcome. And actually, a lot of these influencers have these amazing stories where they've overcome adversity, which has helped them create this level of authenticity and engagement. And if you can align to that, it's a great way of recruiting influencers, but also just having a wonderful and great idea to get them involved.
Yeah.
Your question, or rather your answer, Emily, and your suggestion about PEG as a tool has clearly gone down very well. Even more people have asked about it, so we will have to repeat that at the end, I think. But the question here actually relates to that, and it relates to the point that you both made about the importance of authenticity. And the question, Emily, I'll come to you with this. Is there a risk that influencers will lose their perceived authenticity due to platforms like PEG, as it becomes well known, and I presume this means influencer marketing becomes so well known, and it becomes so monetized? Do you think that's a risk?
I think this is something that's come up for a while now, and you know, it's something that's discussed a lot. Personally, I've seen it change. I've seen a bit of pushback a couple of years ago when, you know, these YouTubers did start making this their career, and you know, they start to do sponsored content. But I think with a lot of them at this point, they've been doing sponsored content for such a long time that actually you'd be surprised how few people mention that in the comments. You know, they might just be engaged with what they're talking about, and actually, I don't think that at the moment, who knows where it could go in the future, but I would say that at the moment, I don't think they've lost that. I think that it goes beyond the fact that they've been sponsored to do a post. I think people still believe in their credibility and their personality, and they almost look beyond that, I think. But, you know, there have been, you know, you do, as Adrian mentioned, you do have to look out for negative comments, and sometimes that can be, oh, you're a sellout, or, you know, whatever it may be. But as I said, you would be surprised with how much that's actually decreased. I'd say in the past year, I think people just know now that this is their life, and this is the way that they make their money. And you know, they wouldn't do that. They get approached by so many different brands and so many different causes that they still wouldn't choose to work with a product or a brand that they didn't really believe in. I think that, you know, it's rare to get anyone that would just do it because it's for money, you know.
Yeah, and a sponsored post is only one way that you can work with influencers. It's one of the major ways, but the other way is exclusive access as well. So I think, Emily, you worked on a great launch for The Voice Kids for ITV.
Yes. Yeah, so we were trying to get people talking about Voice Kids, because it was the first time that it started in the UK. The series started quite recently. And we were trying to get influencers down to the premiere showing of the show. And that was just about looking for someone who really, really fit the show. And one of the judges was Danny Jones, and I found an influencer called Emily Cannon, who is a big fan of Danny Jones, and so she just, you know, she wanted to go and watch in there, and it went down so well. And you know, you could really, really see that authenticity there. I think something to add to what Adrian said is that, you know, their own channels are their own brands, and they are also looking out for their own brands, which is another reason that they wouldn't compromise, you know, their credibility, because they are their own brand and they want to be authentic as well. And I think that's really important to remember.
Great. We've still got a few questions to get through, which is brilliant. So thank you so much, everyone, for sending in your questions. Adrian, I'm going to ask you a personal and a financial question. I think it's all wrapped up here. So let's see what you make of it. How do you structure your fees and client accounts? Do they have retainers and give you a budget for investing in influencers? Or do they pay a retainer and you use it in chunks for campaigns? So I guess the question is, how do clients apportion money for influencers? Do you make those decisions, and how is it invested?
So it's in two ways. We are retained by a lot of our clients, and for that retainer, we come up with the PR and the influencer strategies, and quite often they're integrated, and they're completely integrated into the digital marketing efforts of that client as well. But on top of that, we would receive project budgets, and the project budgets would be allocated for integrated projects. So that would involve digital advertising, sometimes TV advertising, internal comms, and affiliate marketing, content, all of that. And we would apportion a part of that project for influence marketing. And even within that, we would ring fence certain parts of budgets for working with 2 or 3 influencers, or even a pot for working with micro-influencers, using a micro-influencer platform like Takumi or what's one called then?
And another platform.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, I've we're running out of time. So Emily, I'm going to finish with another financial question for you, and then I've got a big question for you both, which will have a very short answer. So the financial question for you, Emily, is about financial services, actually. And the question is, hi both, I've really enjoyed listening in today. I work in financial services, so we are much more restricted in terms of what we can do. Millennials are a key growing area for us. Would PEG also be useful for our industry, and any other ideas for starting point in terms of broadening our reach? So if you're a financial services company, how can you broaden your reach through influencers? Do you have any examples of that or any thoughts on that?
I don't have any examples, but I would say that if you're going to be working with social media influencers or kind of influencers who are who speak to a millennial audience, I think that it's about thinking about how you can convey that message, you know, not verbatim. So you're going to be basically, it needs to seem organic and it needs to seem like it's part of their lifestyle. And I think that actually, as I mentioned in, I think, the first question about whether it suits every brand, I think that it can, and I think that it's about looking at what they've talked about before and kind of mapping whether, you know, they do talk about, you know, things which are outside, kind of, which are just part of general lifestyle, and kind of shoehorning that in. I don't have an experience with financial services myself, anything like that, I would say. I don't know if Adrian works with.
Well, I think just in terms of examples, I think that if you look at what a couple of the banks have done, so Santander has done really, really well at recruiting sports advocates for its above line, and they use for PR as well. And there are loads and loads of fitness influencers there as well, like Lean Machines that we've worked with in the past. You can see how that could integrate really, really easily into this central idea. Another one would be Barclays and their Digital Eagles, which I think is brilliant. And you can see how influencers can be used there in terms of helping to empower people with technology. So, so in answer to the question is, it's about coming up with the right idea and the right campaign platform, and then using that as the basis on which to engage influencers. Okay.
I'm going to ask you both one final quick question. Emily, I'll start with you, and it could be a very quick answer, please. How long is influencer marketing sustainable? Do you think it will grow and grow?
This is something we've talked about a lot, and I think that it will. I think it will change, as with everything. But I think that you can't get that idea of authenticity and credibility through any other channel, and for that reason, I think it will just change, and people will use different platforms and maybe you know, different metrics. But I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon, and I think that it will start speaking to more audiences than it already is.
And Adrian, you talked about PR starting with smokers around the fax machine and all sorts of other examples from 15, 20 years ago. How long do you think influencer marketing is sustainable? And do you see it just as an extension of PR, or do you think it's something very different now?
I think it's turning into a discipline in its own right. It's different to PR, which is why we need to adapt our skills. I think it's sustainable, but I think it's going to change. And actually, Emily and I disagree on how it's going to change. I remember we had a discussion about transparency of rates.
Yes.
Remember this? That was a couple of weeks ago. And we actually met with a couple of people who created these influencer platforms just to kind of chew the fat a bit. I feel like there's going to be more transparency over how much influencers are paid, and that will lead to more of a bit of a rate card approach. But I think you disagree.
I don't agree with that. No.
Okay, unfortunately, we just have to say there's a disagreement because we are so close to time. But I like to leave it on a controversial note. Listen, thank you everyone. Thank you for sending in your questions. We're going to circulate the slides. We're going to circulate a recording of the webinar to everyone who's registered. And certainly, I'm sure that will have more and more suggestions. As you know, there were a lot of tips and tricks and techniques and tools there mentioned. So thank you. I want to finish with a very big thank you to Adrian and Emily at Fanclub PR for their presentation, for their time, and for sharing their expertise with us today. Thanks to everyone who sent in their questions. Keep an eye out on Gorkana.com for our next webinar, which is all going to be about PR measurement and takes place quite happily in Measurement Month, which of course is in September. So we shall be here in a month's time. Look out on Gorkana.com for the details. I do hope you can join us. Thanks for listening in and taking part. The webinar is now over.